He once said I was good enough to sleep with, but never good enough to marry. Just the janitor's daughter, a secret to keep, not a name to share. 10 years later, I walked into a boardroom he didn't know I now owned, but let me take you back to where it all began, when I still believed that love could rise above status. My name is Emily Rivera, and when I first met Nathan Miller, I was 22, a junior at SUNY Albany, studying finance on a full scholarship. I spent my evenings shelving books at the campus library, and my weekends bussing tables at a diner off Central Avenue. My world was tight, practical, and stretched thin, but it was mine. I knew where every dollar went, and I never took anything for granted. I lived with 2 other girls in a barely heated apartment above a laundromat. My clothes smelled faintly of detergent even when clean. My father, a sanitation worker for the city of New York, called every Sunday night just to ask if I had enough groceries. He'd been both mom and dad since I was 13. After cancer took my mother, he never finished high school, but he worked harder than anyone I knew, and he wore his fluorescent vest with quiet dignity. I wasn't ashamed of where I came from. I just learned early on to keep it in my pocket, next to my subway pass and the gum wrappers I never had time to throw out, because the world didn't give points for honesty. It gave them for Polish, and Nathan Miller, he was polished. Nathan was a senior, charismatic, sharp-jawed, with that easy confidence of someone who never had to doubt if they belonged. He came from a family of wealth in Westchester County. His father owned a logistics firm. His mother chaired arts foundations and believed in private security more than public schools. Nathan was the golden boy in our department, on track for an internship at Goldman Sachs, and always surrounded by people who adored him. I wasn't part of his world, but somehow he let me orbit it. We started talking after an economics panel, where he'd been one of the speakers. He liked that I challenged his take on bond markets, said it was sexy when a woman knew her numbers. He started showing up during my library shifts with overpriced coffee, remembered how I took it. On cold nights, he'd walk me back to my apartment, his jacket wrapped around my shoulders. For a while, I let myself believe I wasn't just a diversion, until I found out that's exactly what I was. It happened at a dinner party at his parents' estate. Nathan had finally let me meet them, and I took that as a step forward. I wore the best dress I owned, ironed my hair straight, rehearsed which fork went with which course. The evening was a symphony of subtle cruelty. His mother asked, "And what do your parents do, Emily?" I told her the truth. She smiled politely, turned to refill her wine, and never spoke to me again. But the real wound didn't come from her. It came later that night, when I stepped away to use the guest bathroom and passed Nathan's study. The door was ajar. I heard his voice laughing with his best friend. She's cute, mad, smart, kind of a project. But, yeah, it's been fun, but not serious. Right? God. No, she's not the kind of girl you marry. She's the janitor's daughter. I remember everything about that moment. The burn in my cheeks, the ache in my chest, the way my fingers curled into fists without my permission. I didn't walk back inside. I called a cab and left without saying a word. I never confronted him, never gave him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I blocked his number, transferred schools, buried the version of me that once believed someone like him could see someone like me as an equal. That was the night I stopped chasing love and started building something bigger. Not for him, for me. I didn't tell my dad what happened. I couldn't. He thought Nathan was a good guy, ambitious, respectful, clean-cut, and my father had been so proud that someone from that world would see value in me. He didn't understand that some people see value the same way they see antiques lovely, interesting, but meant to stay on a shelf. I packed my things, transferred my credits, and moved to Philadelphia. University of Pennsylvania had an opening in their business school's transfer program. I scraped together the application fees, wrote my personal statement like it was a confession, and got in. Full financial aid, housing included, No one there knew me as Nathan's girlfriend. No one asked what my father did. I rebuilt from scratch, class by class, week by week. I worked nights managing data entry for a local law firm and spent weekends running spreadsheets for a startup that couldn't afford full-time staff. I didn't party. I didn't date. I studied like it was war. It wasn't about proving Nathan wrong. It was about making him irrelevant. Every time I felt small, I opened the Excel sheets and built something measurable, something clean, something that couldn't be laughed away in a hallway with a smirk. One night during my second semester at Wharton, I was sitting in the back row of a guest lecture, exhausted, undercaffeinated, and quietly dying inside, when I asked a question that changed everything. The speaker was a woman in her early 40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She ran a private equity firm that specialized in distressed asset recovery. My question was about hostile takeovers. Her answer was detailed, precise. And then she looked at me, just for a second longer than necessary. After the talk, she pulled me aside. "Have you ever thought about working in private equity?" I laughed. "Not really. I thought that was a rich boy's game." She smiled. "It is. That's why I like wrecking them." Her name was Claire Lynn, and over the next year, she became something I didn't even know I needed, a mentor who didn't care where I came from, only where I was willing to go. She taught me how to read companies like crime scenes, how to see the hidden rot beneath polished annual reports, how to ask the question no one wanted to answer, and wait in silence until they broke. Claire didn't believe in loud victories. She believed in precision, in timing. "If you want revenge," she once told me, "make it clean, make it public, and most importantly, make it profitable." I didn't know then how much those words would matter, but I carried them like a compass, because I wasn't chasing love anymore. I was chasing leverage. 10 years changes everything, especially when you spend every single day making damn sure it does. By 32, I had my own office with a skyline view, and my name on a parking space I never used. Rivera Capital wasn't the biggest firm in New York, but in the world of distressed acquisitions, we didn't have to be big, just surgical. We specialized in the kind of companies that looked healthy on paper, but were rotting underneath cash-strapped, over-leveraged, hiding skeletons in off-balance sheet corners. The kind of companies run by people who didn't think someone like me would ever be sitting across the table with the power to dismantle everything they built. That's what I was doing on a Tuesday morning when my analyst team dropped a thick packet on my desk, preliminary files on a hospitality group looking for emergency capital after a botched international expansion. It was messy debt everywhere, weak governance, a PR crisis brewing under the surface. My kind of playground. I flipped through the documents, sipping lukewarm coffee, until I landed on the executive summary. Company, Halston Properties. Current CEO, Nathan J. Miller. For a moment, everything stilled. It wasn't a common name, and when I turned the page and saw the headshot clean-cut jawline, familiar arrogance softened with age, I knew. It was him, Nathan, the boy who laughed about my last name behind closed doors, the man who once decided I was good enough to touch, but not to keep, and now the man whose company was hemorrhaging cash and praying for someone like me to throw them a rope. I didn't say anything, not to my team, not even to Claire. I just closed the folder and stared out the window for a long, quiet minute. It wasn't shock. It wasn't anger. It was calculation. A decade ago, Nathan didn't think I was worth remembering. Now I had the power to decide whether he got to keep his company or watch it crumble from the top down. It was poetic, but poetry wasn't enough. I needed to know why his empire was falling apart, and if I was going to pull the trigger, I wanted to make sure it echoed. I didn't rush. When revenge starts feeling good too early, it gets sloppy. Claire taught me that, so I handled the Halston Properties file like I would any other. I ordered a full audit. We pulled their tax filings, dug through vendor contracts, subpoenaed third-party debt records. All of it legal, all of it quiet. I assigned Marcus, my most discreet analyst, to cross-reference offshore transactions, flagged as consulting fees. Within a week, the cracks widened. Nathan's company wasn't just bleeding from poor expansion, it was rotting from the inside. Shell companies, backdated invoices, suspicious transfers. Someone, maybe multiple someones, had been siphoning money through consulting firms registered in Belize and the Isle of Man. The accounting looked clean enough to pass a surface audit, but not to me. I'd seen this pattern before, self-dealing disguised as external advice, assets funneled away from creditors, and a trail designed to collapse into fog. I stared at the spreadsheet Marcus compiled. Each line was a choice, a lie, a theft, and Nathan had signed off on all of it. It should have been enough. It should have satisfied that quiet hunger in my chest. But then something else showed up. Something no analyst flagged. I was digging through old contractor payouts, petty cash ledgers, handwritten job sheets from nearly a decade ago when I found it. A copy of an incident report from 2013. Worksite. Halston Midtown Project. Employee injured. Rivera. Manuel. My father. The notes were short, clinical, slipped on unsecured scaffolding, no safety harness provided, minor concussion and fractured wrist. There was a settlement signed 3 days later for $2. No guessing. And a non-disclosure clause attached. I remembered that week. I'd just started junior year. Dad had told me he tripped getting off the bus, said he was fine, wrapped his wrist in a scarf and kept going to work. He didn't want me to worry, didn't want me to know that the people signing his paycheck had bought his silence for less than the cost of one of Nathan's suits. I stared at that one-page report like it was a bomb. This wasn't just a story about a man who didn't love me. This was about a man who helped build a system that profited off the backs of people like my father, then erased them from the books. Suddenly, it wasn't personal anymore. It was structural. It was rot, top-down. And I wasn't just going to walk in and buy this company out. I was going to strip it down, expose it, and hang every inch of it in the daylight. But I would do it clean, quiet, sharp, not out of rage, but out of precision. Because people like Nathan only understand 2 languages, power and loss. I didn't rush, not yet. I spent a week assembling the full picture, not just of Nathan's company, but of every thread it touched. Joint ventures, subsidiary shells, board members with conflict-laden resumes, a media consultant who previously ran smear campaigns against whistleblowers. This wasn't just financial rot, it was reputational cancer. I had 3 objectives. Acquire Halston properties at the lowest legal valuation possible. Strip Nathan and his board of every ounce of control. Expose everything publicly, but only after the deal closed. The first step was legal positioning. I reached out to a former SEC investigator I'd worked with on another distressed acquisition, a woman named Jordan Glick, blunt, discreet, and never met a shell company she couldn't crack open. I told her, unofficially, I need you to start watching a name, Nathan J. Miller. She didn't ask why, just said, send me the mess. I'll bring gloves. Next, I called a journalist. Not just any journalist, Eli Zimmer, senior editor at Financial Mirror. I'd fed him stories before, small exclusives that kept my name out of print, but earned his loyalty. This time, I told him, what if I gave you access to the anatomy of a failing empire built on fake firms, exploited labor, and offshore shadows? His voice went still. This about Halston. I didn't answer, just said, I'll give you the files when the timing's right. Then came the playbook. We'd trigger a targeted liquidity offer, framed as a rescue bid from a shell company under Rivera Capital. We'd keep my name out of it. Let them think it was a lifeline, not a takeover. Once the contract was in motion and irrevocable, I'd step forward as the new executive partner and bring everything else down with me. I held weekly war room calls with Marcus and Claire, mapped out reactions, legal pushbacks, PR deflections, ran timelines down to the hour. I even tracked Nathan's public calendar, just to know when he'd be too distracted to suspect anything. I knew he'd fight it. I was counting on that. Nathan had always been predictable under pressure. He'd either bluff with bravado or panic with charm. Either way, I'd already built traps for both. By the third week, we were ready. All the filings were pre-drafted. The journalist was on standby. The lawyers had reviewed every angle. All that was left was to pick a day. I chose Tuesday, not because it meant anything, but because it didn't. It would be the most ordinary day of his life until it wasn't. Tuesday came dressed like any other day, sunny, quiet, deceptive. By 9:00 a.m., Halston Properties had accepted what they believed was a lifeline, $80 million in bridge funding from a Cayman-based holding entity, tied to a discreet financial recovery firm. No red flags, just cash. The board was desperate. Nathan was over-leveraged, and the company was hemorrhaging trust. Faster than capital. The agreement was structured as a rescue, but embedded in the fine print was the real payload: 51% voting rights, and an executive override clause. It was all legal, all airtight, and all mine, at 11:13 a.m. The final signature cleared. At 11:40, I walked into the boardroom. Nathan stood at the head of the table, white shirt rolled to the elbows, talking strategy to the remaining directors. He paused mid-sentence when he saw me, eyes narrowing, eyebrows tightening, mind visibly racing to place me. I gave him 3 seconds. Then I dropped the line. "Good morning, everyone. I'll be assuming operational control effective immediately. Rivera Capital is now the majority stakeholder of Halston Properties." Nathan stared. "Emily, still remember my name?" I said coolly. "That's a start." The room blinked. My general counsel began handing out updated executive filings. My name was right there. Bolded, listed as interim CEO. Nathan's eyes darted across the page. This is a joke," he snapped, grabbing the document. "You tricked us. You hid behind shell firms. This isn't how business works." I stepped closer to the table, my voice calm but absolute. "This is exactly how business works. You should know you've been doing it long enough. Only difference is, I did it legally." He turned to the board, looking for backup, but none came. Most of them were already reading their copies, faces blank with dawning realization. That's when I nodded at my assistant. At 11:19 a.m. Financial Mirror dropped the bomb. The empire beneath the surface. How Halston built its fortune on fraud, exploitation, and offshore lies. It was precise, ruthless journalism written like a forensic autopsy. Eli Zimmer had published everything: the shell companies, the offshored invoices, the falsified vendor trails. Page 3 was especially brutal. A scanned injury report from 2013, featuring one name in bold: Rivera Manuel, my father, a man who'd been paid $2.00 and a silence clause after being injured on a job Nathan's company had mismanaged. Nathan's phone started buzzing. So did the PR reps. A director stood up and left the room without saying a word. Someone cursed under their breath. Nathan turned back to me, face flushed and jaw clenched. "You did this just to humiliate me?" "No," I said. "I did this to take back control." Public humiliation. That's just how incompetence reacts when the spotlight finally lands. He opened his mouth to say something else, but I cut him off. "This isn't a negotiation, Nathan. It's a transfer of power. You've already signed it away." His eyes searched my face for what? I didn't know. Remorse, a crack in my voice, some lingering softness. I gave him none. "You planned all this?" he asked finally, almost whispering. I leaned in just enough for only him to hear. "I planned it quietly. I executed it legally, and I made it profitable." And then I sat at the head of the table, his table. By the end of the week, Halston Properties wasn't just under new management. It was unraveling at the seams. The PR fallout was instant. Financial Mirror's expose had gone viral. 3 former employees came forward within 24 hours, confirming forced NDA settlements and internal misreporting. The SEC launched an inquiry. A whistleblower hotline opened and flooded. Nathan tried damage control. Of course, a last-ditch interview on a late-night business show where he blamed legacy systems and misinformed subordinates. But it was too late. By Friday morning, the board had convened without him. At 10, Zerpthresa, Embus, Nathan Miller was formally removed from all operational roles, and his stock options were frozen pending investigation. He didn't show up for the vote. He didn't have to. That afternoon, another story broke. Page 6. Of all places, heiress Julia Ainsworth calls off engagement to Halston. CEO amid scandal. The article was brutal. Sources say Ms. Ainsworth was blindsided by the ongoing investigation and appalled by recent revelations of labor exploitation. There was a photo her stepping out of a black SUV, engagement ring gone, face stone cold, Nathan's last safety net gone. That night, I sat in my office alone, lights low, watching the markets digest the news. Halston's stock had dropped 17% before stabilizing. My team was already restructuring its debt under Rivera Capital's oversight. I wasn't celebrating. There were no champagne corks, no speeches, just numbers, stability, control. The next morning, my assistant knocked gently on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her tone unreadable. It was Nathan's mother. She looked smaller than I remembered. Expensive coat, perfect hair. But her voice was tight when she spoke. "I came to speak to you as a professional," she said. Not as his mother. I motioned her to sit, saying nothing. "I'd like to offer my help managing Halston's charitable arm," she said, carefully, salvaging what can be salvaged, preserving reputation where possible. I believe my name still carries weight in certain circles. I let the silence breathe between us. Then I replied, calm as ice. "You once told me to my face that girls like me don't belong in rooms like yours. Now you're sitting in mine." She didn't blink, but her jaw tightened. "I'm not looking for revenge," I said, "but I don't forget. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just let her sit there, in a chair 2 inches lower than mine, and wonder. 3 days after Nathan's removal, I received a call from someone I hadn't heard from in years, Victor Lang, managing partner of Crestbridge Capital, one of the largest private equity firms in the country, and a longtime advisor to multiple government agencies on corporate restructuring. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Emily," he said, "your play with Halston that was brilliant, ruthless, surgical. You didn't just clean house. You made a statement." "I wasn't trying to make one," I replied. He laughed. "That's what makes it land harder. I've got a proposal." We met the next day in a private dining room overlooking Bryant Park. It was one of those places where they don't hand you menus. They hand you trust. Victor got right to it. There's a federal task force forming to audit distressed corporate portfolios linked to offshore misconduct. They need someone smart, unshakable, and unafraid to tear apart old systems. Your name came up. I'm here to ask if you're interested. I stared at him for a beat, not because I was surprised, but because part of me wasn't. I'd known, deep down, that something bigger would come knocking after this. He leaned back. This wouldn't just be a consulting gig. You'd have real oversight, government funding. You'd be the one making sure companies like Halston never climb back up unless they earn it. You'd be cleaning the entire ladder. A few years ago, I might have cried from pride, or fear, or simply from the shock of being seen. Now, I simply asked, "Why me?" Victor's answer was quick, too quick. "Because you don't flinch, and because you know what it's like to have the door slammed in your face." I sipped my water, looking out at the park. Couples walking, a man feeding birds, a woman yelling into her phone. For a moment, I saw my younger self in the reflection of the glass. Oversized blazer, second-hand heels, folders too heavy for one hand. Then I blinked, and she was gone. I'll consider it, I said. Victor nodded. That's all I ask. We didn't shake hands. We didn't need to. When I walked out of that restaurant, I wasn't thinking about Nathan, or his mother, or the board meetings still waiting on my approval. I was thinking about the weight of power, and how, when you've carried silence for so long, even opportunity feels heavy at first. I didn't give Victor an answer right away. That night, I went home, not to my penthouse in Tribeca, or the apartment paid for by Rivera Capital's profits. I went to Queens, to the same 2-bedroom walk-up where my father still lived, the same place where, for years, I studied under the dim yellow light of a kitchen bulb that buzzed every winter. My father opened the door, wearing his old Knicks hoodie and a pair of house slippers with holes in the soles. He didn't say much, just stepped aside and hugged me like he always had. Like time didn't change a thing. We sat in the living room. No pretense, no performance. After a long silence, he asked, "You okay?" I nodded, then shook my head, then nodded again. "I think I won," I said finally. He looked at me, tired eyes full of something stronger than pride. Did it feel like a fight or a war? I didn't know how to answer. We ate reheated arroz con pollo and watched an old Knicks game from a decade ago. It wasn't about the basketball. It was about breathing again, in a place that never needed me to prove anything. That night, I lay on the pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling, surrounded by quiet. Not corporate silence, real quiet. The kind that doesn't ask for anything. I thought about Victor's offer. The idea of power had once felt like freedom, a weapon. Now, it felt like more chains, shinier ones, with better offices and more zeros. Sure, but still chains. What I had built wasn't just a company or a win. It was a life on my terms. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I needed to climb higher to prove I belonged. The next morning, I left a note on the fridge for Dad. "Gone early, don't worry." Yes, I had seconds. Love. EU. Back in the city. I called Victor from the sidewalk in front of my office. Not from the boardroom. Not from behind a desk. He picked up on the first ring. "I'm honored," I said. "But I'm not the one." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Fair enough. But if you change your mind, I won't." I cut in gently. Not because I can't, but because I don't need to anymore. I hung up before I could second-guess it. I didn't need another boardroom. I already had the one that mattered, and this time, I built the table myself. 2 months later, I stepped back from daily operations. Rivera Capital still held majority stake in the newly restructured Halston, now operating under a new name, Redline Equity Group. A clean slate. The press loved the narrative the immigrant's daughter, who cleaned up corporate corruption and rewrote the rules of the game. But I wasn't interested in headlines anymore. I handed day-to-day control to my COO and took an advisory seat. No public statements, no press tour, just quiet restructuring. And then I walked away. People kept asking me what I'd do next. Start another firm, join a policy think tank, launch a fund for women of color in finance. All good guesses, but the truth was simpler. I went home, not forever, but long enough to feel the floor under my feet again. I taught a guest seminar at Wharton, titled Structural Silence, Power, Class, and the Cost of Being Underestimated. The room was packed. Some of the students looked like I used to tired, skeptical, sharp. I told them, sometimes the best way to beat the system is to let it hand you the knife and then cut clean. When I visited the new headquarters of Redline Equity Group for the last time, the lobby had been redesigned. Minimalist, clean, quiet power. On the far wall, where the old Halston logo once stood in polished brass, there was now a matte black panel. No names, no emblems, just a quote, etched in steel. "Silence is not surrender. It is strategy." I ran my fingers over the words, not for nostalgia, but for closure. Nathan never reached out again. I heard through mutual contacts that he'd taken a leave of absence from the public eye. No lawsuits, no public tantrums, just a man who vanished into the shadows. he once thought belonged to everyone but him. His mother resigned from her board positions, quietly, the way shame tends to move when it no longer has a platform. As for me, I kept going. Some days I mentor, some days I write, some days I simply breathe. But every now and then, I pass by a glass office tower, see a man in a suit, with the same confident gait I once mistook for depth, and I smile, because I know something he doesn't. I survived the system that made him, and then I rewired it from the inside out.